Thank you, mayors, for being with us. I want to start by asking you the same question I started with Cecilia Munoz. I mean, we are talking about possibly the greatest creation of wealth in one place, maybe since London and the Industrial Revolution, maybe ever. And yet, as you go around the country, people see this as much as a cautionary as an optimistic tale in terms of great wealth, but great strains on affordability, cops and nurses, much less waitresses, having trouble living anywhere near the places that they work. When you look at the whole picture now, Mayor, and let's start at the far end and come this way. When you look at the whole picture, how is the region doing on balancing growth and equity?
Well, poorly. I think it's pretty clear. From roughly 2012 on in Silicon Valley, we added about 6 times as many jobs as housing units, and we see the impacts, and they're all around us. Thousands of homeless, and we see the number growing substantially over the last homeless count 2 years ago, and tens of thousands more, hundreds of thousands who are squeezed daily, just trying to survive in this very expensive Bay Area. And you know, I think it's the easy thing to do is simply blame it on tech. I think we're all pretty responsible together. Frankly, local government needs to step up in a big way, particularly around building housing. And I don't think we have done nearly a good enough job of that. And certainly regionally, I think we can be acting more coherently.
And you've set up many of the things we want to come to. But Mayor Arreguín, I mean, there's a story that is very personal for you in terms of your own experience with the housing crunch. Talk a little about that, and also what you think the role of cities as opposed to bigger units of government can be in dealing with it.
I grew up in the city of San Francisco during the last dot-com boom. And so I saw that the major demographic changes happening, the displacement crisis in the Mission District, and we're facing the same crisis again, not just in San Francisco, but throughout the region. And while I think tech has brought enormous prosperity and growth to the region, that prosperity has not been shared by all. My city has the highest per capita homeless population in all of Alameda County, and Alameda County has had a 43% increase in homelessness, the largest increase out of any county in the entire Bay Area. So we are increasingly becoming a region of the haves and have-nots. And on my own personal experience, because of the rising costs of housing and the lack of adequate protections for renters from displacement, my family faced eviction on a number of occasions. So I have personally experienced what it's like to lose your home. And I know there are many people in my city and throughout the region that are facing similar challenges. Yeah. And so I think I agree with Mayor Liccardo. It's our shared responsibility. The private sector, the public sector, the regional governments need to come together to find a solution to this crisis.
Is housing the primary place where these pressures concentrate, or are there other areas as well? Education.
I think for my city, it's housing. And with all due respect, we don't build housing, we entitle housing. We entitled 140% of our state requirement, over 1,400 units, 19 have been built. And when I talk to the developers, like, why did you ask for the entitlements if you're not gonna build? I get a litany of reasons from a recession is coming, we don't like inclusionary below market rate housing. I won't go into some of the more not nice things that some of them say as to why they don't like BMR housing, but I think we need something from the state that mandates that when you take a housing entitlement under RENA, that you actually build that housing, because we are losing our BMR housing. It's a big percentage of our entitlement, and it's not getting built. And meanwhile—
And you have no recourse?
We have no recourse. We cannot say, you must go build. I meet with the developers, and I understand what they're saying, but the bottom line is we don't get the housing we need, and we don't get the BMR units that go along with that.
You know, these issues, as I said, radiate at many levels of government. The state was looking at legislation on increasing zoning densities, particularly around transportation hubs, but that kind of hit the wall this spring. Do you need state action, or is there significantly more that cities can be doing on their own?
I think we do, and you know, I supported Scott Wiener's bill, SB 50, you're referring
SB 50,
to. I think we do need state mandates. I like what the governor is doing in terms of threatening cities that aren't stepping up. Yes, we need carrots, but we also need sticks, or maybe we just need really hard carrots. One way or another, we gotta get folks. By the way, I stole that line from Michael Tubbs, so I gotta give him credit. You know, The reality, though, is that there's a lot we can do together. We don't need the state to tell, well, we do need the state to tell us because, frankly, not everybody's getting it. But there's a lot we can do also without the state. And I'd like to see, for example, in those communities where they're adding millions of square feet for corporations to build wonderful tech campuses, that we have impact fees that are really modulated based on the housing balance, the housing to job balance in each community.
Yeah.
And if they want to continue to expand tech campuses, then they need to pay more fees so we can build the affordable housing we need.
So we'll talk about that in a second. But I was going to read you from our colleagues at Brookings, just had a report out just literally a couple days ago. And it concluded, across much of California, apartment markets are working in the opposite way that economists expect. Communities with high rents build fewer new apartments than lower rent communities within the same metro area. Of the 6 largest metros, only LA and Riverside had a positive relationship between rents in 2010 and the number of new apartments built from 2013 to 2017. In the remaining 4 metros, including San Francisco and San Jose, the epicenters of exploding housing costs, high-rent communities built fewer new apartments than their cheaper neighbors. This pattern strongly suggests that zoning or other institutional factors are constraining development. Agree?
Agree with the facts, disagree with the conclusion.
Okay.
Because actually, we have zoning to entitle more housing than anywhere else in the Bay Area. We've been pushing hard to get more housing built. The great constraint right now in San Jose is we've got developers who are sitting on shovels saying they cannot get the financing because construction costs are so high. And it costs between $650,000 and $700,000 per unit if you're building a 100-unit apartment building just to build today. And so we're looking at every way we can to see if we can bend the cost curve in some way with cross-laminate timber or prefabricated modular, whatever it might be. We've got the largest co-living project in the country underway, hopefully in a few weeks. Try to find ways to really reduce that cost per unit because right now the lenders are saying it doesn't pencil, so we're not going to fund it. So instead, obviously, we're funding what we can as a public agency. We've got 3,000 units in the pipeline, 1,100 in construction, that are funded by the city and the county. But we know we can't solve this problem just with publicly funded subsidized housing. We need the market to work for it, too.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that there are things that could be done on a local level to streamline production. And I do think we do need some state help because there are communities that are not meeting the responsibility to build housing. We need to approach this from a regional perspective. We need regional funding sources and regional strategies. But also, we can remove all the barriers, but at the end of the day, it will be up to a developer, even if we streamline the process, to proceed whether to build. And with construction costs escalating, I do think we need to look at different ways of building, such as modular housing, affordable by design, to try to lessen the costs.
Why just the developers? Should there be obligations on the employers?
I agree.
The big employers?
I think we have a significant jobs housing imbalance in the region, and so I support the sort of suggestion Mayor Liccardo has put forward, which is there needs to be some shared responsibility, and there needs to be a regional jobs housing linkage fee that moves funds into a regional pot that we can all use to build low-income
Explain that a little bit. So if you add employment, you have to contribute to housing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need carrots and sticks, and we've seen an enormous amount of job growth, but we have not seen the commensurate increase in housing units. And so I think we need to step forward and address that regional shared responsibility.
What do you think of that?
Well, one thing we need to do is address the demand side as well. In San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors improved the South of Market project. It has 8,000 housing units and I believe 30,000 jobs. So they've created a housing deficit of 12,000 more units. And in Santa Clara, Sam's familiar with the related project, will create about another 18,000 housing unit deficit. So a state law that says, hey, you must build that housing at the same time you're building this commercial office space. You can't push it off down the road 10 years and say, yeah, maybe we'll get around to that later. And I have to say in Cupertino, we've been trying to limit the office growth because right now our jobs housing balance is, I think we're right behind Sunnyvale in terms of job-rich cities, and we don't want to worsen the jobs housing balance because it works against us.
What you're talking about in terms of the regional housing jobs fund is something mandatory, not.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're now dealing with Google, right? Who has saying, okay, we're going to do $1 billion in housing. I think it's the number.
Yep.
But there are a lot of people, ranging from community groups to Senator Feinstein, who said, we need to know more detail.
Sure.
Is that good enough, what they're doing, or do you need something that has more structure to it?
Well, let me just add, I mean, before they announced the $1 billion commitment, they committed to City of San Jose in an MOU that we signed and approved by our council was, first, that they were going to build housing around their campus, thousands of units. 25% of it would be rent restricted and affordable. And they would agree to a linkage fee, to pay a linkage fee on their commercial office development as well, in addition to paying tens of millions of dollars.
Are they building housing only for their own people?
No.
No, okay.
No. This is going to be open to public.
What do you think of, is the Google deal a model or not enough?
I think that it's encouraging to see that level of public-private partnership. I think one of the biggest challenges is that there have been large tech companies that have been building campuses but not building the housing on their campuses. And some of those communities where they're building around have not been quick enough to entitle housing. So I do think it is the responsibility of local government, but it's also the responsibility of the employer to either build the housing or pay and provide the resources for us to build the housing with employees.
You have kind of a big employer, right?
Yeah, we have a large fruit company in our city.
Everybody in the world, is like wondering, where is this Cupertino?
So
What time is it there? Everybody knows.
We know what time it is.
Everybody in the world knows when you get to work.
right.
Yeah.
It's Cupertino in Italy.
Yeah.
I think what I don't like is these one-time housing donations that have illion at the end. And $1 billion's great. That builds 2,000 housing units or less right now. We really need some kind of regional tax that keeps coming so we can keep building. Now, Mountain View passed their small business tax that mainly affects Google. That's a positive step, but that's not regional.
Yeah.
A company's going to say, oh, well, I'm going to move over there because they don't have that tax. And you can't operate that way.
Because we are seeing, San Francisco here, they passed Prop C. They're looking at propositions this fall on additional tax measures to fund more services for the homeless and mental health. But Oakland isn't far, and Berkeley isn't far, and the Valley isn't far. How far can individual cities go in trying to get a handle on this? Or ultimately, and maybe Eric, I'll start with you, do you need regional answers on questions like minimum wage, housing, taxes? And is there the capacity to even have that conversation about creating regional answers?
We absolutely need a regional approach to address our housing crisis, the economic crisis is facing our region, our homeless crisis. Our homeless population is not unique to one city, it is a regional population. And so what one city does has a broad impact on the entire region. So there is a conversation happening right now on regional government and how to bring various regional agencies together to have integrated transportation and housing planning. There also is a measure that's in Sacramento, Assembly Bill 1487, introduced by Assemblymember Chu, that would actually create a regional housing finance agency to enable bonds, linkage fees, head taxes, to provide regional resources to address housing. I think it's those types of approaches that are really going to be critical in addressing this crisis.
Yeah. Are any of you in the interim, while thinking about the kind of taxes that San Francisco is looking at? Are you?
Yeah, we passed a $1 billion measure in the county of Santa Clara. We put a $500 million measure just on the ballot last November. It got 64% of the vote, which unfortunately is not enough to pass under the state rules, even though that's a greater margin than any president has ever won an election in U.S. history. But Jesse got one passed, and good for the voters of Berkeley, and obviously for his leadership. We're all trying to do it, but the reality is these one-off deals are only one-off. I think, as you said, we really need to bend the cost curve, and this is where we need to work collaboratively with tech. I think it's great. Cisco gave $50 million for homelessness. Google's kicking in, land and money as well. But what we really need their help in is figuring out ways to change the problem so it's not $650,000 or $700,000 per unit problem. We're looking, for example, at backyard granny flats. With prefab modular housing, we could build these not at $250,000, which is what it costs typically today, but maybe at $100,000 or $110,000. And now all of a sudden, if you rent restrict those units, you can do so with a much lower subsidy per unit. And you can build a lot more of them because, let's face it, most of the Bay Area is still suburban, and you got a lot of single-family housing, and you're not going to bulldoze it to go build apartments, at least not if you don't want them to burn down City Hall. So dealing with what we got is a lot of single-family housing. We got to figure out ways to get the housing on those parcels.
Yeah.
The most severe example of this pressure, obviously, as we've kind of touched on, is homelessness. And you had to make some tough decisions in Berkeley. You've made some controversial decisions. You've opened the Pathway Stair Center. You passed Measures O and P, but you have implemented, I believe, the ban on RVs at a time when others are, a homeless parking lot to open in San Francisco, and I think Oakland as well. Why did you make that decision? And do you feel it is simply pushing your problem elsewhere in the region?
So we are actually working on developing a safe parking program at one or
Okay.
multiple sites in our city, and we're actually working with our neighboring cities of Oakland and Emeryville and Alameda County on developing a regional program. The issue is that we are a city of 112,000 residents, and we are facing a disproportional impact of our crisis of unsheltered homelessness. So we needed to manage this problem, and we want to focus our resources and our land on those who really need the most support from local government, families, people that work in our community, students. And so similar to what Oakland did, we want to create a program that specifically focuses on those vulnerable populations. So we're working on that. We're working on trying to do a regional approach in Alameda County. And these are very tough decisions. We're really managing a humanitarian crisis, and it's incredibly challenging for all of us.
Do you feel that as well there? Do you feel it as acutely?
It is. And one example in our city, we have a large community college, De Anza College. They have set up a safe parking program, and our community services department sends a food truck for like a mobile food pantry out there. There's a lot of homeless students that are food insecure and housing insecure. And unfortunately, setting aside part of a parking lot is really not solving the problem. It's a Band-Aid, and we need to do better. And I know the college is looking at taking some land and putting in some student housing, which is fairly unusual at a community college.
I'm going to bring in the audience in a moment. I should say that I live in LA, so I'm not throwing stones at anybody on homelessness, believe me. One quick final area. What I mentioned, we talked about before, the phrase, at least for me, is very memorable that John Hickenlooper coined when he was mayor of Denver, and he said, we have the Denver paradox. We attract people from all over the world because our economy is so good, and obviously all of you do as well, but we can't get our own kids from low-income neighborhoods on track to compete for the jobs that we are creating. Do you feel that you are, Mayor Liccardo, that has been you've had a number of initiatives in that area. How big is the barrier, and how much incentive, how much concern have you seen from the other side, from the employer side, in dealing with it?
Well, I think tech is clearly starting to get it. I think they've been feeling the heat for several years about the fact that our tech workforce doesn't look like our community. I think 3% of tech professionals in Silicon Valley are Latino. We are a city of about a third of us are Latino, and so clearly there's a lot of work to be done, and they are starting to understand it. And so we're starting to see some significant investments. We'll be announcing one shortly in our San Jose College Promise program around how we can create pathways for low-income students to be able to get the four-year degrees they critically need to get in these jobs.
Yeah, because if you go to any city in the country, to me, the first statistic I look at is what share of the white kids, black kids, and Hispanic kids attend schools that are majority poor. Because that's going to tell you an awful lot about what you're going to get at the other end of the pipeline. And it isn't quite as bad in some of the cities here as elsewhere, but we're still talking about enormous disparities. In Oakland, just taking this about 85% of the African-American kids, 90% of the Latino kids, but only a third of the white kids attend schools that are majority poor. If you have that level of residential and economic isolation, are you ever going to be in a position where essentially these opportunities are reaching into those neighborhoods?
Well, just one statistic. Our African-American population in 1970 was at 20%.
Yeah.
Now it's at 7%. So that just shows the significant demographic changes happening in our city, in our region, and how we're losing our economic and cultural diversity. It is a challenge that we all face, and I think that's our responsibility as mayors and leaders of local government. How do we work with the private sector to expand educational opportunities, job opportunities? How do we increase
anything you really like that
housing?
you've seen from the private sector? Anything that just kind of rings the bell, seems different?
I think the partnerships that are happening in cities like San Jose, in working with Promise programs, creating job pathways, really working to promote STEM, I think is essential. How we can create those entry-level positions, how we can, have a public-private partnership to address this growing opportunity challenge that we face in the region.
Okay, we've got mayors on a tight schedule, so questions, not speeches, starting in the back.
My name is Deborah Kaplan. I'm with Enterprise Accessibility, a consulting company. One of the groups that has one of the most critical problems when it comes to the housing crisis are people with disabilities who need accessible housing. In the past, when accessible housing is built, there's often no guarantee that people who actually need it will get it. And so I'm curious what your jurisdictions are doing to make sure people with disabilities are at the table when you're coming up with new and innovative solutions for, say, reducing the cost of building, that people with disabilities will get more than just a pittance when the actual results happen.
So we just opened earlier this month a 100% affordable senior housing project, and all the units are accessible, 100% are accessible. We're also beginning work on a project that will be for developmentally disabled adults, and that's a critical need that's not being addressed by any of the ELI or VLI or moderate income BMR housing. And those people, they come to our meetings and I work with them, and we're finally getting some traction to move forward. And it will only be 18 units, but they're thrilled with just 18. They'd like 40, and if we can find more land, we can do more. But I agree, it's a critical need.
Any other thoughts?
I think by requiring universal design as a requirement for not only affordable housing, but for private development, and really working to ensure that, this is not only important for people with mobility issues, but for our seniors. And we have a silver tsunami that is happening in our region. So we need to be prepared, and we need to make sure that housing is fully accessible.
It's another, first here, yeah, okay, yep.
Hi, my name's Nadia Lopez. I'm a reporter with San Jose Spotlight, and this question's directed to the mayor of Cupertino. I want to believe the comments that you say, that we need housing and it's critical. But you've raised some eyebrows from other local leaders in the South Bay for comments that you made about building a wall around Cupertino and then having San Jose pay for it. And recently, the planning commissioner, Ray Wang, also wrote some comments next door. I believe he said, "Save the suburbs from an onslaught of anarchists and YIMBY neoliberal fascists." So my question is to you then. How are you ensuring that you and other leaders in Cupertino are serious about solving one of the region's most critical issues?
Well, let me just say to his credit, he hasn't sent us the bill yet.
Right. So, first I'll point out that about the wall comment, it was right when El Presidente had shut down the government because he wasn't getting his wall and throwing his tantrum. And what was really said is, I want to keep the Teslas from Saratoga from driving through our city and clogging our streets, so we'll build the wall. Hopefully no one took that seriously. I don't go out during the week with bricks and do any construction. So it was a joke. At the time, everybody laughed, and it kind of gotten taken a little bit out of context, or a lot out of context there. And as far as Planning Commissioner Chair R. Wang, comments, those were totally inappropriate comments. I know he's apologized. Maybe it's not enough. And I think he knows. I think he knows to behave better in the future. And his choice of words was very bad.
Is the question about choice of words, or whether the words reflect policy and inclination?
Yeah, policy and inclination.
Yeah.
Basically,
Is it just words?
Yeah, I don't think that reflects our policy at all. We're in a situation now where we have one developer who wants to build 2,900 units of housing and will have 0 BMR units. And clearly the community and the council was not on board with that. And now they've changed, well, we're going to do SB 35, but all of our BMR units are going to be studios and 1-bedrooms with nothing for families. And we're powerless when it comes to SB 35. They take these concessions and they say the state has given us the ability to make the BMR housing different, even though your city says it has to be the same.
Let's squeeze in a quick final question.
Yeah, quick final question. So you guys are focusing on the pipeline issue, and it's not a pipeline issue. There's plenty of diverse talent out here. Not everybody needs to be an engineer at these corporations. So my question is, I used to work at a scooter company. I was a contractor there. I was the only Latina, one of 20 women out of over 100 people. There were 2 black people at this scooter company. If all these scooter companies want permits to enter your city to use their product to make money, Why are you not tying in diversity and inclusion numbers for full-time benefited employees at all of these HQs?
Good question.
Let me just offer, I think there is a pipeline issue, and I think regardless of race, there's a pipeline issue, because in the United States of America, we're underproducing computer science graduates by about 250,000. And so there is a point here where we can actually elevate opportunity in our communities at the same time that we're meeting needs of employers who make employment decisions. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we should expand opportunity both in the educational pipeline and in the job.
But you don't want to mandate, you don't want to tie anything to you don't want to have any enforcement power over their hiring decisions.
We generally don't.
You don't.
And by the way, there's a lot of federal
Right.
restrictions about
There
what you can do and
what
not.
you can do, whether you
Yeah.
can do that. I know
Right.
that Kamala Harris, running for president, is talking about using the EEOC to measure these kinds of things and tying federal contracts to that. But you could not see a pathway to do that with anything like, you're talking about like building permits and
Well, all scooter companies need city permits to operate in
anything.
Why aren't they tying in D&I?
What do you think? Is that something we're thinking about, or is it not really within your legal reach?
I'm not a lawyer, but I do think however we can encourage companies to increase the diversity of their workforce is essential. And in fact, in Berkeley, we're actually engaged in a new program working with our innovation sector to not only provide entry-level job opportunities for young people so that we can diversify the workforce, but encouraging companies that really have a broader social impact.